What's up, everybody? Alec Lauer here with Trinity Road Times. I'm here with Philip Danford from Inside Pack Sports. How you doing, Philip?
Doing good, man. Ready to talk ball?
Yeah, this is an exciting one for me because I want to talk about the defensive line, and I think State. I feel like State has had an underrated defensive line for most of the Tony Gibson tenure. Since he joined the program in 2019 and became the full-fledged defensive coordinator in 2020. 2019 was the year where State switched from a 4-2-5 to a 3-3-5. And, if you go all the way back to 2019, you remember that. That was a really, really bad football team. And there was a lot of discussion back then about the three-man front and if that was, a liability in the run game, right? Because that team was giving up, hundreds upon hundreds of yards per game. And what we've learned, obviously, what everybody's learned, obviously, since then is that that's, not really the case. And the three down front has really become very in vogue in college football and the tight front and things like that. So, I wanted to talk about that a little bit, look at some film and, discuss what makes State effective as a three down front football team and, how that front has been effective at stopping the run. So, to start things off here, want to take a look at kind of a basic, um, kind of a basic, picture for State here, right? So this is a tight front. So that's TITE, which is not how you spell tight, but that's what we got here. And it's defined by three specific alignments. So we'll get into exactly like what the advantages are, but just real quick, the defining characteristics are really a zero technique nose tackle, right? So that's a nose tackle that's going to be head up on the center right here. And then your defensive ends are in what's called a 4-eye, right? So a 3 technique would be right in the middle. A 4 technique would be head up on the tackle. The 4-eye is kind of shaded on the inside shoulder. It's in the basically between those two. And the 4-eye is really something that has become popular and has given offensive coordinators quite a few headaches. So, Philip, what is it about the 4-eye alignment that is so effective?
Well, I mean, one of the big reasons you see the four eyes so much, and you can go back to, no, it's been around for a while from the standpoint of, San Diego State, Ron Roberts. There's been some pioneers in the 3-3-5 defense, but Iowa State really gets a lot of credit when you look at how they went to this odd man front to kind of combat some of the spread offenses and the RPOs that were proliferating the Big 12 back in, 2016, 2017, that range. And so one of the big things about the 4-eye is you have the B gaps, right? So it's very important, right, Alec, if you want to label, B gaps up there, right? So you have A gaps between your centers and your guards, but then you've got your B gaps between your guard and your tackle, right? And that has always been, especially in a zone run game, a major entry point, right? An aiming point for running backs. And now what you're effectively doing is you have the ability to very quickly cancel out B gaps within uh, between the offensive linemen there. And you'll have, for example, the nose tackle take 1A. You'll have the middle linebacker take another A. And now you've got four interior gaps you've been able to effectively cancel out. And now you're getting runs to spill to the edges, right? And you're allowing athletes from the second level to go be athletes and run it down, right? That's what they effectively used to call spill and kill, right? So you were taking away interior gaps and you were forcing them to the edges, spill it, kill it. And so that was really one of the key components to it. The other piece was the RPOs. So if you think back to if there's a four-man front, now you could have an over front and under front. It doesn't really matter right now, the differences between them, but the key is there was always what we called the bubble. And the bubble was there was a gap between the shade or the one technique would be the inside shoulder of the center and whoever was going to be on the outside, like a five technique. And there was a B gap bubble there. And that bubble in a four-man front was the linebacker's responsibility usually. Well, once RPOs came along, now you were able to manipulate that particular linebacker. If people think back to one of the most popular RPOs that's been out there for many years now is simply a zone run, right? Going towards that B gap. And if the linebacker steps up, what are we going to do? We're going to run a quick slant behind him, right? And so now you're putting that linebacker in conflict because you know he's responsible for that B gap. But yet, if he jumps up into that B gap with aggression, we're going to throw the slant in behind him to that area that he voided. Well, if he stays back and he plays the pass, then we're going to hand it off, and now we've got a voided B gap, right? So teams were able to put that linebacker in conflict. Now we get to the odd front. We're saying, all right, our defensive end is going to be in that B gap, right? And we're going to have our nose in the A, one of the or the middle linebacker in the other A, and we're going to let our linebackers kind of play in space still. And now we're able to protect a little more against those quick slants and those RPOs that were, I mean, just so effective, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Now there's an answer for them.
Yeah, and it seems like one of the big things that, just from a philosophy perspective that has changed with this type of front is, a lot of the fundamental concepts with run defense in the past was containment, right? Keeping the edge. Whereas now, you're willing to knock that ball off the table to your linebackers more. We'll talk about, everything flows to the linebackers is like a really common phrase you hear with this defense. That's kind of what they mean is you're pushing that ball to the outside and you're letting the athlete make the play in space more. So that's kind of the fundamentals of it, I think. Just as a whole, also you have three huge bodies fitting interior run gaps as opposed to two. Your typical four-man front, your more common versions of that. Like that matters also, I think. So State obviously is playing, defensive ends that are pushing 300 pounds now, as opposed to many, many years ago. You'd see these guys playing more at like a 250 range or so. Um,
But
so yeah, I mean,
so kind of following up on that, right? So NC State's gotten bigger along the defensive front and they've gotten smaller at the next level, right? It's allowed them to get a little more athleticism. I mean, even Isaiah Moore was a pretty big linebacker to play in this system. We haven't had a linebacker that big since him. And I mean, but he was a great athlete. And, it's allowed them to actually get bigger up front, get smaller at the second level for, the ability to again get athletes in space, let them run down the ball carrier, all that kind of stuff. So you can kind of see the switch in philosophy that that's occurred over the last several years.
definitely, yeah. Yeah, it's been because that was what we mentioned in the beginning. That was always the question is like, people were asking at the beginning, is you only have three guys up there, as you used to have four, but you have, that extra size and you're fitting three instead of two, between the tackles. And that's kind of, part of what makes it such an effective thing against the run. And we're going to look at a couple examples right now. We're actually going to start with one of my favorites. So this is a play from early on in the Clemson game. So you can see the tight front that we just talked about here. You got Davin Van and Savion Jackson there in that 4-eye technique. And Van here, this Van is one of my favorite players on the team. I just love, his physical ability. I think it's really almost alien. Like he's so powerful and he's so quick off of the ball that he really creates a number of different problems. We're going to look at that in a second, but real quick, Philip, I think you wanted to note something about the term 3-3 stack.
Yeah, I mean, we hear the 33 stack all the time with NC State's defense. They're one of a handful in across college football running it, right? And that stack says, usually our linebackers are, directly behind a lineman. That's not actually usually true. For NC State, it's the Mike. Now, the Mike is almost very consistently lined up behind the nose, but usually the Sam and the Will, you'll see them move around all over the field, right? Like if you get trips to the field, the Sam is going to be pushed out. You could have the Will walked up. I mean, there's all kinds of places, but it's usually the Mike that we're referring to when we talk about a 33 stack. When he's right behind that nose tackle, because if you pay close attention, they play off each other a lot. When one goes one way, the other one goes the other way, and the A gaps and stuff like that. That's who we really watch when we talk about that stack.
Yeah, and you mentioned they play off of each other. So like with the nose tackle for State, like a really common, this is a little bit of a sidebar, I guess, but tangent. But a really common way that State plays a nose tackle is a lag technique, which basically means the nose tackle is responsible for the backside A gap, and that's determined post snap, right? So that linebacker also is reading that and reacting, and it becomes responsible for the opposite gap. And we'll see some of that in a couple of these clips coming up when we look at some zone clips. This is GT counter out of 10 personnel for Clemson. And so GT counter is you got your guard, or that's not a guard, that's a tackle. You got your tackle and your guard here, and these are your pullers, and they're going to be pulling across the formation here. And then these three other linemen are all going to be down blocking this way. And the key block that I want to talk about on this play, the key block on GT counter, really any counter or power play, is going to be what happens right here. Right, so this is going to basically be the determinant of how much space you create at the point of attack. It's a harder block to execute than the kick out that 74 is going to. You're going to see 74 take on Jalen Scott in a minute. It's that's a little bit easier and a little bit asking a little bit less of a guy. This is the big one for Clemson here is going to be 78 trying to drive Davin Van this way. And then you're going to see 74 is going to come around here, and Jalen Scott here is going to meet him on the outside. And then 50 is supposed to be the lead for Will Shipley here. And so let me delete that real quick. So we're going to take a look at what happens here when 78 tries to drive Davin Van. And this one's pretty funny to me, that anything that involves Davin Van and some of these gap scheme concepts against Clemson were some pretty funny clips. So 78 is actually going to get a pretty good start off of this, I'd say. So come on, Cade, snap the ball. So you can see he's come pretty far. He's actually got this started, and this looks like it's setting up pretty well. And then I want you to watch where 78 ends up, when the linebackers eventually meet. Okay, whatever. In the line of attack here. So after 78 goes here, so he gets shoved all the way back into the pile, basically. And so we're talking about that down block trying to create space right here. Now that's his job, basically. And then 74 here is going to kick him out. And that's what creates the space for your lead blocker and your running back and the play to bust open. And Van, talk about Van being a good player, right? He's a guy who's not just, he's so versatile, right? Because he's very large. He plays around 300 pounds. He's very strong, and he has great get off also. So he can be really effective with a number of his different moves. And this is just pure power from him, right? He's just driving this guy back into the ball. And
He's
you can
got
see,
he's got great leverage. Like, I mean, we always talk here, what, low man wins, things like that.
yeah.
Getting leverage on a guy, getting a lineman up, getting them vertical, and now they've lost a bit of their base. I mean, that's stuff he's so good at.
And then you can see by the time Shipley gets to the point of attack, like the space between 50 and 78 is just non-existent. And that gap would normally belong to Peyton. I think that's Peyton on the outside at the will, who's responsible for flowing over there and making that tackle if he gets through there. But Fan just squeezes this down so well. And that's kind of, the point with State's defensive line is this play, the end result, I believe, was a tackle by the linebacker. I think Shipley bounces this back across the field, but the end result is a tackle for the linebacker. I think it was Peyton maybe, and he gets that stat. But this play really got squeezed down. Van played a huge role in this, and it doesn't show up on the stat sheet. But this is the kind of the defensive line at work.
Yeah, and I'll say too, if you want to talk, the odd fronts, there has been, as a response to the odd fronts, a big uptick in the counter concepts, these counter runs, uh, because of these fronts. Alec, if you could rewind back to just the very beginning of the play, right? There's been an uptick because if we go back to the even pre-snap there, right? Because so much of your blocking schemes are about angles. So now that you have a defensive end who's starting as a 4-eye, he is now inside the tackle. Look at all these angles that really help the offensive lineman on these counter plays. And so they're blocking down, right? Block down, block down. And that in turn, right, because of this new alignment, has really brought on this huge resurgence, right? Oklahoma under Lincoln Riley was the first one that really exploited it, and they have a terrific counter concept. I mean, they can run it a million different ways, and they get the reads and the bash and all that into it. But this is a direct result of this big movement towards these odds and these tight fronts. So NC State sees it all the time. But yeah, a lot of times when these counterplays, because we see them all the time, whether fans from the stands recognize it or not, we see these counterplays all the time. Yeah, the linebackers are most likely going to get stats on this, right? Because they're flowing, right? They're filling these late gaps. But a lot of times it's that defensive line, it's that push, especially at the point of attack that Davin Van's at right now, that really caused the disruption. But yet the stats are going to go to the second level guys.
Yeah, like this is like we mentioned, like this is kind of the key matchup in the play, and Van's ability to just win that one-on-one like that is really what kind of breaks the play from there. So, everyone else kind of just has to basically sufficiently do their job at that point, and it's pretty much bottled up. So, he's a great player, I think. Maybe even a little bit undervalued, at an ACC level, because like you mentioned, like there's just not. He doesn't put up a tremendous amount of stats, but he really is a
Well,
problem in the run game.
I mean that's part of just the NC State defense as a whole. I should say the defensive line, not the other guys, but defensive line as a whole. Probably not the sexiest defense for a defensive lineman to play in, honestly. Right? Three
Yeah,
man front, you're in your inside guy. You're not Kamen Rucker last year who got 10 sacks and like eight of them came in the first half of the season against nobodies. And
yeah,
you're able to rack up those stats and make all ACC teams, whereas, you're simply just not going to have as many opportunities in this defensive front to get those counting stats and sacks that are big and sexy. I mean, these guys are football players here, right? This isn't, that's the reason we don't see the Xavier Lyle types of defensive ends right now, right? They can't play to this. We need guys playing the interior who have to be pure two-way players. They've got to be able to run and play the pass at the same time. They have to be able to redirect. You're going to see some snaps where if it's a three-man rush, let's say it's drop eight, their first steps are to the interior on the B gap and see if it's a draw play or a quick run. And if it's not, then they're going to work their way back out. And now they're contained. They've got multiple responsibilities on a singular snap. That's not necessarily conducive to get sacks, but it's conducive to have a very sound defense to play the run. And if it's not there, keep the quarterback in the pocket, let the other guys in coverage, right, the drop eight, let them do their work on the back end. So there's a lot more to it than just big guys, see ball, get ball.
yeah. And then so the gap scheme plays talked about one from Clemson. This is going to be a zone play here from Duke, which interestingly, there's no official record of this game ever happening, but we do
Mm.
seem to have a tape of it for some reason. So we'll take a look at this, but um,
Oh, that was
yeah.
a
So
miserable night, man. I'll tell you
oh, I was there.
that. We sat in the rain through that. Oh, that was miserable.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, if you want to take the lead on this one though, Philip.
Go ahead and play it here, right? We got a zone. I think the big key, right? So we pulled several plays here. Um, is it Hibbler there, the left defensive end,
Yeah.
right? His penetration here, right? So go ahead and play and let's see what we got. All right, so you've got zone left, right?
Yeah.
And the running backs aiming key, right? This kind of now it's kind of maybe a mid zone, could be inside zone. They got a little more lateral movement than I would necessarily say for inside zone. But I'm gonna say, right, he's probably looking A gap, right? This is probably an A gap run, but look at the way Hibbler is able to spike through there. His ability to spike through that B gap has now cut off effectively four gaps that the runner could go, right? Because zone runs, they have an aiming point, but that doesn't mean they necessarily have to hit that aiming point, right? The runner has the ability to bounce, bang, bend, all that kind of stuff. But Hibbler's now taken away four gaps to the runner's left. He is forced to cut back before the runner's actually even supposed to make his decision, right? A lot of zone runs, when the tailback gets the ball, it's usually the third step that's when they make their decision on which hole am I going in, right? They're letting the defense flow to kind of see that. He takes away the three steps. I mean, you've got a running back here having to make a decision almost immediately upon getting the ball. And now Hibbler's not going to get the stat here, but it's Hibbler who, that penetration to the B gap is what caused all that havoc in the backfield.
Yeah, it ended up being Boykin who got the tackle. Actually, I want to look at this one. I think it may be helpful to look at it from the all 22 view. So, this is our guy, Red Hibbler, right here in the defensive end spot. And you can see, so, we think this is inside zone. So inside zone aiming point usually is, front side A gap. And then you're reading the leverage of that center. But, what Philip just talked about is you see what happens with Hibbler. Like, there's nothing he can do there. That's a cutback instantly, or he's going to run right into a 300-pound guy. So, it's that penetration that blows that up. They say that the quickest way to blow up any zone play is penetration. And that's what happens here. And, Hibbler's a guy that kind of fits an interesting mold for state. Like, he's huge and he's a good athlete. And those are guys that are hard to find. And it's one thing to have, like, this defensive strategy that state has, but it's another thing to recruit well enough to make it work. And getting guys like Van and, Hibbler may not quite be the player that Van is, but he's a large man who's a good athlete. And those guys don't exactly, show up at your doorstep every day. It's kind of a testament to the recruiting to be able to find and land guys that, have the ability, like we just talked about, to be strong one-on-one in those gap scheme down block concepts, and then, still have the get off to create penetration in zone plays like this.
Oh yeah. I mean Hibbler, we saw last year, tremendous pass rusher, right? Great
Yeah.
bend for a guy his size, the ability to bend, what we call run the hoop, right, from the outside in pure pass rush situations. It is tremendous. I think you see a high level run stop here. I think this is where we actually need to see him continue to build on, right? We
Yeah.
know he can play the pass. It's actually more of this in the run, and I think he becomes a very high level ACC defensive end. Then the other guy, I know we're talking defensive end, Jalen Scott jumps off here. All right, I'm a guy, as we're getting ready for the season to come up, I think Jalen Scott's going to be missed a little more than some people suspect. I think he's a guy a little unheralded, made a few more plays than he got credit for. He also has great penetration there, uh, inside of that tight end as well. But yeah, so I mean, I see Hibbler. Hibbler takes away those initial gaps, and all of a sudden you've got Scott there, and this guy is going, hey, I'm going to try to hit the A gap. To all of a sudden he's bouncing it way outside, and you've got Devon Boykin making the tackle, right? So, I mean, you got multiple guys making tremendous plays here.
Yeah. So kind of one last look here. This is kind of the key matchup, the key read right there is the center on Brandon Cleveland. And you can see the center kind of gets this backside leverage right here a little bit. So the running back's, initial aiming point probably is going to end up, he's probably going to cut this back toward this A gap. And that's kind of where he can no longer do that. And that's Red Hibbler at work. He and Van, I think, are my two favorite players on the defensive line because they're just aliens, I think. Yeah,
I mean, they're
definitely.
tremendous. Then you get Cleveland, man, pure power. Um, he's going to be fascinating to watch this year. I really enjoyed the film room with him over at IPS recently, and just kind of discuss, playing that nose spot, playing that zero, and kind of he gets double teamed on the regular, like he's used to it. That's and how do you beat double teams? We talked about that, and I mean, he's a guy that will have the opportunity. Now, I think he has the ability to do it. He's got to put it all on the field or on tape. I think he has the ability to be an all ACC defensive tackle. I really do. Incredible power. We just have to see him. He's going to get more snaps than he did last year, right? We saw it in the bowl game, and I thought he had a good bowl game too. We just got to see it throughout the season. I think he's going to get a ton of recognition. I think Cleveland's a next level guy. We just got to put a little more on tape, but I think he's going to be right up there.
That's exciting. That's a really, really important position.
Massive.
Um,
I mean,
and
when
if
you look,
you're,
Aleem McNeil, Corey
yeah,
Durden, I mean, State and I mean State has just had I mean just some really good nose tackles. Um, obviously, Clark he's now at Miami. Clark had his moments. I mean he's a player that for me, I'll be honest, film review, I was a little hit or miss on. Sometimes I felt like he was missing that anchor in the run game. I thought he was really good from a pass perspective, rushing the passer. But sometimes I thought he kind of didn't anchor as well as you maybe want your nose to do. I think Cleveland's probably the exact opposite of that. Cleveland has a tremendous anchor. It is hard to move that man. He is a huge man. But right now we want to see, right, what else can he do with it, which I think he's got the moves. I just think you get a few more snaps, he's going to get a little more on tape. I think he's going to get the coverage here.
and here we're back to a different Clemson play, which this is a fun one. It's the same play that we looked at earlier from Clemson. It's GT counter out of a 10 personnel look and another play that's going to be a Davin Van stop, but the complete opposite. So we just talked about Davin Van, his strength. This is going to be his speed, right? This play will be the first one we've looked at that's actually I believe the defensive lineman actually gets credit for the tackle here, but it's the same concept, right? So you've got 78 here in the down block, and then you've got these two guys as your pullers. 74 is your kick out player. 50 is going to be your lead player. And this again is going to be um, your key matchup. But what's funny about this one is it doesn't end up even involving the linebackers, because what you're going to see here is Davin Van is literally just going to get a tremendous amount of penetration and disrupt the pullers so they can't even get to the point of attack. So 50 is the lead blocker on this play, and that's where he ends up. So that's not what you want if you're Clemson. And that's just, that's athleticism and get off. And he beats 78 to the inside. And so this play doesn't even, I mean, this is where it's supposed to hit. I mean, it doesn't even get close to it. So, that's another great play by Davin Van, another great example of, kind of his versatility, as a guy that can do a lot of different things, can win a lot of different ways.
Yeah, so uh, a couple things about counter, right? Is so if you kind of rewind here a little bit, so you'll notice if you just look at the center, right guard, right tackle, right? Their initial steps, if you took out the left guard and left tackle, you might say, hey, this is a zone play, right? This is a zone play to the left, right? And that's a lot of times what it looks like zone if you only look at half of it, but of course you got the pullers that are now coming back the other way. I mean, tremendous speed because frankly, this the way he shoots that gap, you would think, all right, this is going to be an easy down block for 78. He's going to be able to clear him, and then we've got our wrapper, we've got our kick out, and then we've got our wrapper coming behind him. But there's such speed coming off the edge that I mean, he gets to the pullers. I mean, he's in the second puller's lap before he even crosses the center line of the offensive line. I mean, that's incredible play recognition, especially now. I'm curious. This is play what 38. This was the
Yeah.
play that Clemson got NC State on. This is same side counter, right? So it kind of breaks some tendencies because the running back is actually going to stay to the right side of the run, right? Instead of crossing face of the quarterback, which is more common. And this was a play that kind of gave NC State some trouble in this game, but this was a great example of just pure ability, right? I mean, I think that's really what it comes down to here. Van being able to shoot the B gap and recognize, what it was really quickly.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, like he's in the lap of the puller right there, and I just like the linebackers over here. I think that's Caden, another great circle drawing by me. I think that's Caden over there. He's just like watching.
Yeah.
He didn't have to do anything. He's just like watching. I mean, because like on this play, right? He's like the interior gap on. I think that would be where he would want to end up. But yeah, he's just chilling, just taking a look,
Yeah. So
watching
yeah,
Davin
he
Van.
he's got the wrappers. So the kicker would be pushing out. I forget who that was on the edge. I didn't see who it was, but
That's Jalen, I
um,
think.
yeah, probably Jalen. So they'd be kicking out him, and they'd be looking to wrap for Fordham, but yeah, he can chill. So
Yeah, just,
so you can
put
see
something on
him
TV.
because he reads it right, so he bumps out. So as
Yeah,
they move gaps, you've got to move gaps, right? And so that
yeah,
you can tell he was reading that.
yeah. And then it's just a matter of thinking about what pizza you want to order when you get home.
There you go.
So now, different kind of play here. We're on to the Miami game. So this one's interesting to me because Miami was really the only team that I thought ran the ball consistently on state. There was a number of games where State gave up a couple of really explosive plays, but there wasn't a lot of teams I felt like had a high success rate running the ball. But Miami was one that did. And if I remember correctly, this was the only team that really had its base run concept against State be duo. So, Philip, can you kind of explain maybe what it is about duo that could potentially give someone like a defensive front like this some trouble?
Yeah, I mean, so duo is, in my opinion, a very high-end run. You'll see it with really quality offensive lines, and you see it at the NFL level a lot. You don't necessarily see it across college football. Frankly, NC State doesn't run duo very much. Um, Last year, the two teams we really saw it against were Notre Dame and Miami. But Miami really ran it. They had some success with it here because what you're going to see, duo was all about double teams at the first line, and so we're talking about how many double teams can you formulate along that first line of defense, and we're going to see as you kind of play it here. You've got is that what Savion Jackson um, out to the right side, and he's going to get a double
It's
team.
Jackson right there.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you got Clark in the middle. He's going to get a double team, and that's going to leave you a single, right? You're going to get the right tackle on Betty, and you're going to get Davin Van on the tight end. Now, one of the things that jumps out, this isn't the sexiest play, but the ability for those guys to anchor, right? Clark anchors really well on this play. I know I just said, right, it's one of my criticisms of him, but he does a good job here. He sheds the first guy, right? And then he's able to take a double team and make it basically a single block because he's able to kind of shed the center and now he's made it a single block. So really good technique. And two, he's basically only given them a half man, right? So he's not giving them a clean surface. But if you look at what Clark and Jackson are able to do here, right? This allows Peyton to stay clean and it gives one-on-ones here with Betty and Van, and especially Van. And we just talked about high end player. When you get one-on-one, you need to win. You need to win in this situation, which he does. He wins right across the face of the tight end. Betty does a good job of standing the right tackle up, right, and just kind of forcing the running back to make a read, and Van, gives Van time to get there. And I know this isn't sexy, but this is a really good job of Clark and Jackson just simply taking up blockers, right? They are really 2-on-4 when you look at it, right? Because that left tackle doesn't really, because of duo and their rules, doesn't work up to Peyton hard, but you're basically 2-on-4 right there. And they do a really good job at the line of scrimmage of not losing ground, and that allows the guys who are 1-on-1 to win their blocks and make the tackle. And so, again, to me, just another example of man, that's not going in a stat sheet. That's not sexy. It's not on a highlight film, but it is those small elements that are crucial to high end football.
Yeah, and you mentioned Davin Van as the one lineman here that's one on one needs to win. Like it's a luxury to have a guy that can win that frequently, and he
Yeah.
definitely wins right there. If he gets turned outside, this play's making it to Devon Boykin most likely, and that's let's just
Oh
keep talking
yeah,
about
no,
Davin
if he
Van.
doesn't win, yeah, it's Boykin at that point. Yeah,
Yeah,
and we saw it. I mean, it took NC State. If you think back to that game, the first drive, Miami really had success, right? It kind of took NC State a little bit to kind of, all right, we got to piece this together, and eventually, they were able to stop them with decent success after that first drive. I know there's another drive that they ran the ball a little bit. Maybe it was the opening drive of the second half, but yeah, they kind of put two and two together and they started winning their blocks up front. But it's the small things like that. It's winning those doubles that gets completely overlooked by folks in the stands.
and who ended up making the tackle? I think it was like 17 different guys, but um,
Yeah, I mean, what Van kind of jumps on his back and rides him here, and then you can
yeah,
see
he's
him
working
ripping
this.
there.
Yeah,
He's pulling the lawnmower chain, trying to rip it.
that's a tough one for the stat keeper. So this is going to be another same side counter play, similar to what we were talking about with that second Clemson play a couple minutes ago. But instead of GT, this is going to be GH, which means that your guard right here and your H back right here are going to be your pullers. And so 68 for Louisville right here is going to be your kick out guy. So he's going to pull across, and his job is basically going to be to eliminate Jalen Scott right here. And then 42 here is going to become your lead. Your wrapper becomes your lead there. And then, 25 is going to cut in here and then bounce back out. So that's the same side counter. So this play is going to get blown up mostly by CJ Clark. And it's really subtle. Like it doesn't look like he does a ton, but he just gets he gets enough of a push, an initial push right at the snap to push that center back into the pulling lane, I guess, of the guard, and actually ends up tripping him. So we'll watch this in slow motion right here. So keep an eye on that number 68, that left guard, who's going to be pulling, and he has that initial block. And you can see he's actually going to trip right there. And by the time he gets to his spot, his body is just turned the complete wrong way because he tripped over his own guy's leg. So we can go back and actually watch this from the all 22 angle too. He's going to be the same left guard right there. And you can see the push a little bit better. It's not a ton, but Clark is going to get that that center, that initial punch is going to get that center stood up, and he's going to plant his back foot backwards, and it's going to trip up his own guy. And so by the time this gets over here, this block is blown already. And that is another play. Fast forward along here, another play that's going to be a tackle here for Scott, and Sean Brown participates. But the play itself was really made by the defensive line again. It was really made by C.J. Clark. What happens if this puller gets cleanly to his block? You don't know, but he doesn't. And it's, whoops, sorry. This is not the picture you want if you are a pulling guard on counter. That's not what you want. So, just another example of, this is a defensive tackle here, really making just a head up nose tackle, really just straight up power into a guy. And it completely blows up another gap scheme play.
Yeah, I've had a conversation with Zeke Correll, and I felt with Grant Gibson actually about this as well a couple years ago. Just that whole concept, right? When you've got these counter pullers, it's a very they are basically striking a match off your butt. They are pulling tight, right? Because I mean they're looking to hit their landmarks as quickly as they can. So if you're a center and you've got that head up guy and you've got to block him straight on, or you've got maybe block back on a three technique or something like that, you have to be straight down the line. You cannot be pushed back at all, and that's what happens, right? And so if you get those big, powerful, nose tackles, right? Those big guys, that's the reason these guys weigh what they weigh and the bench what they bench, right? To try to create this havoc back there just from pure power and force. And I mean, not everybody can do what he just did, right? So I mean, that's impressive, Brandon Cleveland. I fully expect he'll be able to make some plays like that this year because power is very much his game. But that shows there's very small margins for error for an offensive lineman on a play like this, and CJ Clark takes advantage of it.
Yeah, so when you talk about all the different run concepts that you can run and the different ways you have to defend those, where we talked about a lot of it's about counter and power, which are both like plays that have down blocks kind of as their key block. Talk about a zone play. We looked at a duo. Like State defends all of these pretty well, as we've seen. What is so there's you mentioned counter is really something that has come back around a fair amount with the 4-eye technique and stuff like that. But to me, it's not just the scheme. We talked about scheme. It's not just the scheme. To me, there's a lot of credit that's due to, and we talk about this with basically anything NC State football, is finding guys with the right frame, finding the right type of player, and then strength and conditioning and development to create somebody who can do all these things. So, we talked about all the different ways that Davin Van can blow up a run play. That guy was a blue chip recruit. Like that's not, that guy had tons of offers. And State's ability to land someone like that and find, Savion Jackson, same thing. Like it's recruited this unit really, really well. And it's been, kind of unheralded for a number of years now, especially with when you have, Drake Thomas and Isaiah Moore and Peyton Wilson on the same field at the same time. Those guys are going to get most of the headlines, and those guys were all phenomenal football players. But it's important really to keep in mind that the linebackers' jobs in this defense are made easier by how good the defensive line is. And we talked about it kind of ad nauseum now that those stats don't show up for guys like Van, but they are difference makers that don't always get their due.
Yeah, no, they very much developed a prototype of what they like at each of the positions, right? They have metrics and landmarks that they want these guys to hit in terms of height, weight, all that kind of stuff. And sometimes they might take a guy who's a little bit shorter, but there's still metrics they have to hit to be able to play on this defensive line. And he has to be a guy that they think they can add good weight to. Once you get into Thunder's strength and conditioning program, all these guys, man, strong as ox. And so that's a major piece to this. These are guys that take on double teams on the regular. We were talking about it earlier. If it's a drop 8 and you've got 3 men rushing, well, against 5 offensive linemen, 2 of them are going to get double teamed, right? That is nothing new to them, right? How do you fight off double teams, right? And part of it is the pure power that goes along with it. And I think you have to be. I think a lot of people don't necessarily give credit to the intelligence that you have to have up there, right? Things happen quick, right? The ability to recognize run plays very quickly, right? First steps, right? We talked before about how if you're on the front side of counter, it could look like a zone play. The way, linemen are kind of blocking down on it, it might look like a zone. But being able to recognize this very quickly, because everything is in a phone booth up there, right? And you have to react and move, and these are big guys at the drop of a pin. And so, it's impressive. And they don't necessarily get all the coverage they probably deserve, but it's a massive part of the rise of NC State defense over the last 3, 4 years.
Sure. So Philip, anything else you want to add about the defensive line before we wrap this up for everyone?
I mean, I think the big thing is, there's a lot more. I think you go into more in depth in terms of we didn't get even too much into the pass rush stuff tonight. Right. I mean, in terms of their aiming points, right? How they attack certain blocks. I mentioned earlier, right? How they, there are certain plays they'll check run first before they rush. There's a lot to it. I mean, so a lot to those guys. And I know I've had the opportunity to interview and do some film rooms with a couple of them. They all speak, I will tell you this, they all speak very, very highly of Coach Wiles. They think a lot of him. And I think he has really come in and done a tremendous job with that group.
Well, thank you everybody for tuning in, and hopefully we'll have some more stuff for you soon.